Hi, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to this video of my conversation with Lauren Carter, author of Places Like These, a collection of short stories from Book Hug Press. I just finished this collection. I've been reading it off and on for about a month, and it has been pure joy. If you want more information about Lauren, you can go to her website, www.laurencarter.ca. Today, we're going to talk about this collection. And before we get started, I'm going to give a summary of the collection in my own words, Lauren, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
Okay. Places Like These is an engaging collection of stories that each delve deeply into the emotional, sometimes tragic lives of the characters who inhabit them. There are sisters navigating infidelity and the recent death of their father. There is a woman who had an emotionally wrought, very short high school friendship with a complicated writer who doesn't even remember who she is. There is a couple grieving the loss of their unborn children on a beach. And there is a trip to Lilydale, a spiritualist community where a woman tries to connect with her recently dead husband. Many of the stories take place in remote, rural, boreal, lake-fronted, small-town spaces that amplify the emotional tension in each of these stories. I am excited to hear you read from the title story, I think you've mentioned, and we're going to hear the first 30 lines of Places Like These.
Okay. Thanks, Allison. For weeks, I have been seeing Robert, turning the corner of the grocery store as I walk in for frozen dinners and yogurt, disappearing into subway cars. Always, he is wearing that light brown jacket he had in the 80s and a pair of worn, baggy blue jeans. He looks like he did the summer of 88 when we took the train to Moosonee, when we began traveling, started spending money on ourselves, when we gave up, as my mother called it, right up until she died. He has a message for you, Joni told me, and said I should go. 3 times in 1 week, I heard about the place. The article in the doctor's office when I went for my mammogram and flipped open budget travel to those glossy pictures of the community's iron gate, the summer camp-like amphitheater, and a medium peering down at her spread of tarot cards. Then there was a book, face up in a sidewalk remainders bin, bearing a black and white image of Victorian psychics. And finally, the reassuring baritone of Michael Enright's voice on the radio. Next up, a town where the dead can talk, reverberating through my quiet apartment as I walked, towel-clad, to take a shower. I froze, leaned a naked shoulder against the plaster wall, felt a shiver under my skin. You have to go, Joni said. He is close. Even I feel that. In the hotel lobby, a framed sign says absolutely no seances. It's crooked, hung on a wood-paneled pillar. A dusty Persian carpet is spread on the hardwood floor beneath a set of wicker furniture. The pink and red cushions clash with the rug. The place is old, smelling of mildew overlaid with the cloying fragrance of artificial vanilla from the plug-in air freshener. Out on the front veranda, half a dozen rocking chairs thump against the hollow floor. I hear people chattering, mostly women with their daughters and girlfriends, eager to reach their loved ones, find the person who can penetrate the distance, pull back the dead as if hauling fish from the depths.
Thank you. I love that story so much. I'm excited. I have a bunch of questions that are probably selfish because I'm taking advantage of the fact that you are not just a writer, but a writing teacher. So a lot of them are framed in that way.
Yeah.
But because you read Places Like These, I want to talk about that trip to Lilydale with your mom and sister. And as a writer, what came first? Did you think to yourself, I'm going to go to Lilydale and then write a story about it? Or did you go
Not
and
not so much. It was so it was my sister's 40th birthday, and I just really wanted to find a really interesting and unusual place to take her to. And so the three of us set out. And once I was there, seeing those interesting details like the no seances sign, and the pet cemetery, the inspiration stump place. All of
Mhm.
that is, true to life. It's exactly
Yeah.
what it was like when we were there. Um, it That emerged. But also, interestingly, I had the triple experience of having Lilydale come to me 3 times
Oh,
in
really?
that way. Yeah, so that kind of became, that sort of pushed me to bring us there, to get my sister there, and yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
That's weird. It's funny because when as much as I think to myself, "Oh, I don't, spiritualism is kooky or whatever." When I'm in it, if someone's giving me a tarot card reading or someone says anything about my energy or someone does something that I know 100% I dreamed about or whatever, suddenly it's like,
Yeah,
"Oh my gosh."
yeah,
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 so when I read about Lilydale and I was like, "Oh, this place has been around since 1879," it doesn't surprise me.
yeah, yeah, very
Yeah.
interesting place, and also just, we went, but I didn't write the story for several years. It
Right.
wasn't until my husband and I moved up to northern Manitoba, and I just somehow, I remember the morning that it came to me. It was like a collision of thinking about Lilydale and my mom. My We had recently lost my stepfather, so thinking about death, and then
Mhm.
also wanting to combine the other setting of the ocean,
Mhm.
of by the ocean, which I'd never really written about. So they all kind of, those the settings came together for me, and
Right.
I worked with the setting first.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's amazing. In a lot of the collections, and I'm sure one could argue that complicated families are at the heart of so much great fiction, but
Mhm.
in places like these, not the title story, but in all of the stories, I really did feel like there was, this, eh, need to express that desperate love and desperate hate and all those complications that exist in families. Is that, a place where you go often? Like that complicated, emotional
Yeah,
interiority
yeah.
of families?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think for me, the most rewarding part of writing is to really get inside the psychology of characters.
Mhm.
I just love it. I love diving down into their depths, and really taking those years, those drafts, those revisions to really understand who these people are.
Mhm.
And so often those people have complicated lives, and usually, shades of darkness.
Yeah.
Just because that's where I go. That's what I want to explore.
Yeah. Well, and it's that truth, right? That
Yeah.
we all as humans have darkness. We all have, wishing ill upon somebody or, wishing ill upon ourselves or the
Hmm.
world or whatever and not expressing it, I think
Hmm.
is stifling, which I think is why why writers are so emotional, why writers are
Hmm.
desperate to get down all of that darkness.
Yeah, and I really enjoy writing characters that are not so likable, They
Right.
make mistakes, they do stupid things, like there are a few characters in here who do really, not very nice things. And I think that there has to be a place in literature for that,
Mhm.
because it stretches our empathy,
Yeah.
It lets us see, like, and especially if you can kind of draw an understanding of why that person does what they do. Not to
Mhm.
say that every story or novel has to have the whole psychological underlay, because I don't think that's true.
Yeah.
Uh, the writer has to know, of course. But yeah, so I like the unlikable, the oddball character. Yeah.
Yeah. But interestingly enough, when they are included in this, I'm thinking, as I had mentioned before we officially started Grassfire, that's a seriously complicated marriage, a seriously complicated relationship. And although there's much to dislike about Arthur, the husband,
Mhm.
he's not truly unlikable because his dimensions are locked in, I guess, into her experiences and thoughts that she's unwilling to even express.
Yeah, absolutely. Almost like an unreliable narrator
Yeah.
situation. Yeah, yeah. Which I think a couple of the stories do that, like The Great and Powerful.
Yep.
You know, she's sort of an unreliable narrator. You never quite sure what's happening with her. Like,
Yeah.
yeah,
She's
yeah.
Heather in The Great and Powerful is one of those characters I mentioned when I posed a question to talk about endings.
Mm,
That you are so incredibly talented at writing, and I
mm,
don't know if it's this or everything that you've ever written. So incredibly talented at writing an ending that is potent, um, that might be described by some as unfulfilling, but also just so full, right?
mhm,
Of so much. And Heather's ending in The Great and Powerful, when she's forced to return to the community that I'm assuming religious community she's living
mhm,
in,
mhm,
there's still, in the hopelessness of her being stuck or locked or jailed in that community, there's still hope that her dreams are going to help her get out of
mhm.
there. Can
Yeah,
you
and
talk
yeah.
about endings for you as a writer? Do you feel like as a writer, you're moving towards an ending, or do you feel that sometimes it just comes and you go, okay, that's the ending?
Yeah, both things. There is that beautiful moment when you're like, "Oh, okay, the story's done." You know,
Right.
I that's my favorite, of course.
Yeah, exactly.
But there also are the endings where you do, like, 20 drafts, right? And you can't even quite nail it then, but you have to just, "Okay, okay, I'm satisfied with this," you know?
Yeah.
And I love doing those endings sort of a step before the
Yeah.
conclusion, you know, to leave it to the reader, like to hand over to the reader all the power of this and that weight, you know.
Yeah.
I don't like wrapping things up. I don't like having, you know, putting it in the tidy box. It's too to me as a reader,
Yeah.
I love the stories where I'm sort of left and I have to think about it for 3 days and, you know? So, yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree. And that's the perfection of the short story, I think, as a genre, if you want to use that word. It's that the beginnings start in the middle and the endings end in the middle, and the reader's left to kind of fill in both ends of the story.
Yeah.
Yeah. When you sit down to write a short story or a poem or a novel, how how are you thinking about structure? I have a specific question about how you structured the stories in this collection, but how do you think about that, the beginnings, the middles, and the ends, in the story itself, or the poem itself, or the novel?
Mhm. Well, usually that kind of thinking comes for me in the revision stage.
Right.
So I will write a full draft, longhand. I write everything longhand first.
Wow.
Yeah, and then afterwards I'll type it up and you know, I often find like the initial draft of a short story or even novels feels a little kind of flimsy.
Hmm.
Not like it needs the meat on the bone sort of thing.
Hmm.
So at that point, with short stories, I will often cut the paragraphs up and put it on the floor and
Hmm.
kind of shift things around because then I can see where the gaps, like where can I write in a memory or, you know, an alternate plot happening. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
Like those jumps in time that I have in some of my stories.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so usually that sort of the structural thing, and sometimes those jumps in time will happen just as I'm writing the first draft too, because the most important thing for me in beginning is to embed into the character,
Yeah.
is to really get an instinctual sense of who they are, what's happened to them, what are they bringing into this moment in time,
Hmm.
which is often a fraught moment because I like to
Hmm.
just start at the fraught moment. Yeah, so
Yeah,
structure comes
and
later.
that's your those te I can see why sometimes it would happen naturally, because if you, as a writer, spend a great amount of time with the characters before you even sit down to write a story, I can see that those temporal jumps that are more emotional, like
Yeah.
from a self-knowing or experiential place, or from a time place, like the past and the present.
Yes.
And that, so do you, when you're writing that first draft, I'm interested to talk to you about this and the cutting up, because I'm fascinated by that and feel like it's an important tool that I've used a couple of times, but feel like I could use more often.
Mhm.
Do you write chronologically when you're doing those past present jumps? Do you write chronologically, this is what's happening today, going to Lilydale, going to this, and you sort of writing that, and then move to a past moment and write chronologically that no.
No. No,
Okay.
I mean, sometimes the the shifts, the alternate time things will come in later, but usually for the most part, I just write it as I'm going, because it's a way to understand the character, to
Right.
reach back.
Hmm.
So it's almost like when I'm writing the story, I'm explaining the person to myself. I
Right.
think that's a good way to put it, right?
Hmm.
Like, what brought uh, her to Lilydale?
Right.
What? So the description of the place at first, and then the death at first, why she's there, the description of the place, and then that reaching back into who is her husband and what regrets does she carry. So there's a chronology of her being there,
Yeah.
but then there's the looking back at, and that's how we carry our, that's, I mean, the most fascinating thing I think about character in fiction is that that's how we are,
Hmm.
right? Like, we go through the world with all of our past clunking around in our heads. And, when it's troubling past stuff, it's really often sort of co-present,
Yeah.
and I think that's why it works with my writing, because I'm often thinking about traumatic things, and I
Yeah.
hope that's
It is that's exactly what I thought, because there are paragraph breaks, but then there are also temporal jumps within a single paragraph where
Mhm.
the character's just living in the moment, but living in the past and living in the moment and living in the past, and all of that present day trauma, past trauma is kind of, coming into a single moment,
Yeah.
which
This
I
is why
thought,
I really wonder about AI,
I
you
know.
know? Like,
Well,
can AI do that, right? That's a human complexity
yeah,
that I don't know. I
no.
don't think, yeah. So,
No, I think the simple answer for writers, for artists, for anybody out there is that AI is never going to be able to be truly human, truly
yeah,
humanist, I guess.
yeah,
But I'm terrible at remembering the article that I read or the thing that popped into my head, but the idea that came out of that list of scientists who said AI is going to be the end of the world, basically.
yeah,
That in thinking if that's the case, then AI has mastered the worst of us, right? Because it's not like we as a human race aren't going to be the end of us
mm-hmm,
also,
mm-hmm,
but that AI somehow is going to get the worst of us
mm-hmm.
and end the world. So
Yeah,
in writing,
yeah,
you wonder if AI is doing that. And again, I don't want to judge any kind of writing or any genre of writing or any formula of writing, because I think it's all beautiful. I
yeah,
take as much joy out of a Guardians of the Galaxy movie as I do, a Holocaust film or whatever. Like I don't judge any kind of stories or storytelling, but that AI is somehow going to take the worst tropes,
yeah,
the worst stereotypes, the worst of every kind of writing that has ever existed and put it into stories.
yeah. Yeah, and lacking that intricacy of human thought and and effort, effort to
Yeah.
get bigger, effort to grow, effort to overcome mistakes. Um, I don't know. I mean, yeah, it remains to be seen, I guess, um, but I think that as an artist too, like, that is the journey of the artist, is to ask
Hmm.
the questions and not to present the answers.
Hmm.
Whereas it seems to me that technology and robotics has always been about the answers.
Yeah.
How do we, you know what I mean? Like, I don't think there's a way to balance those two things. I don't know. I'm not well
Yeah.
versed in AI, but this is just what
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, and I think you said it earlier when we were talking about beginnings and endings, right? Like you as a writer are getting as deeply connected to the trauma and the experience, the emotional experience of a character as you possibly can without analyzing it, with leaving the reader to have that experience and take it with them.
Yeah, and to sometimes present the chaos of it. You
Yeah.
know, there can be contradictory desires and, you know,
Yeah.
that often sometimes don't make sense to a person viewing from outside. I think that's an important representation in fiction that's
Yeah.
needed. Yeah,
Yeah. And
yeah,
you see that too in criticisms and people who applaud certain work, right? There's always that personal connection needed as a reader,
yeah,
instead of as a reader or critic, instead of just taking that experience and seeing what it means to you and exploring it in a little more,
yes,
with a little more effort. There's always this knee jerk, I don't connect to that. I
exactly.
refuse, without asking why you're maybe refusing to connect with that, or why it
Yeah,
makes you uncomfortable, or why why you don't care about the characters, and right, all of those negative
yeah,
things that, yeah.
yeah, and that's a problem, right? When people just, I don't like the character, and
Yeah.
they don't give it a chance
Mhm.
to look at this as a human who, yeah, maybe isn't likable. Like in my last novel, Melanie, the main character, she keeps doing stupid things, like, and
Yeah.
that's very intentional. So I met with a book club recently and I asked them, like, does she frustrate you? And they all were relieved to be
Yeah.
able to say that she does. And I said, yeah, because that's the journey out of trauma. You do a whole bunch of dumb things to try
Mhm.
and figure your life out. So, yeah,
Yeah.
it's
One of your characters, Lonnie, does that, and I
yeah,
think,
yeah,
I have a
exactly.
deeply personal connection to Lonnie, but that in seeing her on paper, right? There's a moment when I think to myself, yeah, that makes total sense that you would want to repeat the trauma so that you can maybe rewrite it or change the experience, or anything, right?
Yep,
Yeah.
it's a
And,
thing.
and as
Yeah.
a reader, just thinking, there are tons of readers who are going to be reading Lonnie and thinking the worst of her.
Yes, true.
Yeah. Yeah.
True, but I don't care.
Exactly.
To be blunt.
Good. You shouldn't. You shouldn't, because honestly, I loved every one of these
And
stories.
to hear that you connected with Lonnie is extra special for me,
Yeah.
that means a lot to me, so
Yeah. And I knew, like many women, I think, we know, right? We have the explanation. We know why trauma is repeated, or why tragedy befalls us in similar patterns over and
yeah,
over and over again. We know, but for some reason, society doesn't know, or
yeah,
society feels like they need to uh, blame again,
absolutely.
over and over
Ab
again.
Oh, absolutely, and it's the same with, like, endemic drug addiction
Yeah.
or homelessness. It's like, you know, I don't understand why governments can't understand trauma and
Yeah.
how, this is trauma. Like, nobody wants to flush their life down the toilet with alcohol and drugs. Like, nobody is 6 years old going, "I know, I'm gonna
Yeah.
die of a drug overdose," and it's trauma, and it's
Yeah.
a survival mechanism. Like, I just don't, all this stuff. And I mean, I know it is becoming so much more part of the dialogue now with Gabor Mate and all those amazing voices, but
Mhm. Yeah.
yeah.
Well, and that Gabor Mate's being heard, right? In
Yes.
in what he's saying is speaks volumes in and of itself. I mean, I love him, but
Yeah,
there are many marginalized, traumatized voices who are voiceless, and politics, and I know you're going to agree with this. Politics is filled with people who and again, this is going to sound awful, but who, to my knowledge, grew up with way more privilege than so many other people, and they don't understand that. They don't understand trying to escape something, right? Because they've just
Yes.
been moving in one direction towards
Yes.
that position
Yeah.
of power.
Yeah. And I think those are the people who look for likable characters, right?
Right.
Because
Exactly.
it's too destabilizing otherwise.
Yeah.
You can't think beyond your own lens. And
Yeah.
literature and art, art has always been about illustrating the many lenses.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I mentioned in my little summary of the story, there's a lot of Canada in the stories, but in particular, water.
Mm,
Many of the stories, if not, I won't say all the stories because I can think of a couple that don't have water, that don't take place in water. But is that a result of you just being a Canadian writer and the fact that we can't walk, 2 kilometers without bumping into a lake or a creek or
mm.
a pond somewhere? Or do you, as a writer in particular, find a need to put water in your stories?
I think it's a thing of the place that made me,
Mhm.
So I grew up on the North Shore of Lake Huron,
Yeah.
um, right by water. There was a beach near my house that I used to walk to, like the character in that lift of flight.
Mhm.
Um, and imagining myself away because it was a small town that I wanted to get out of desperately.
Mhm.
But beautiful and a foundational place.
Yeah.
So I think growing up on a big lake, um, it just sort of puts water in your being, like
Mhm.
not being able to see the end of the water is something that just has become part of me. I keep trying to write myself away from water.
Right.
Grass Fire was a very conscious attempt at that, to write a prairie story. I live in the prairies now.
Right.
Well, the Red River is right there. And so I wanted to sort of write a prairie story, and that was what came out.
Yeah, that I love that story. I mean, it doesn't help that I just finished it a couple of days ago and it's probably the freshest. I don't read short stories chronologically either, so it's a problem, I think, sometimes when I sit here to talk about collections as a collection.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
I wanted to talk to you. In looking at your website, and I urge everyone to go there because there's a picture of a piece of writing of
Mm.
yours from the 80s. And Lauren Carter is reporter, editor, writer, everything in that little piece. And I wanted to talk to you about, because I've also got the writer as a vocation book that I'm reading right now. I wanted to talk to you about that being a writer from such a young age, but also when did you know writing was your vocation? When did
Mm.
you know that was going to be what you were going to do?
What I was going to do. Well, I was lucky because my uncle was a writer, my late uncle. Um, so he wrote poetry. He walked the Mormon Trail in the 80s and wrote a book about it.
Wow.
So he really sort of told me that I could do it.
Yeah.
He kind of gave me that permission. And he taught me how. He showed me a copy of the writer's uh, what's it called? The Writer's Digest, the giant book of all the different magazine markets.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And so, back in those days, it was the self-addressed stamped envelopes going
Right.
in the mail. And he told me how to do it. So I started sending work out when I was
Wow.
18. Yeah. And he also advised me not to go to journalism school because that's what I was thinking about doing. And
Right.
because he told me, he said, it'll teach you how to write in that way. And, if you want to be a fiction writer and a poet, then, try to free your voice, go.
Yeah.
And so I did an English undergrad. Yeah, was never much of an academic though.
Yeah. No, I think a lot of people say that, where, the conversation about MFAs and their value or their influence on writers as writers, and whether or
Yeah,
not, I have my MFA, so,
yeah,
and
I do too.
yeah,
Yeah.
the big question being, writers as part of a community. Is that what
Mhm.
an MFA is, right? Like, is that just the beginning of you building your community as a
Yeah,
writer?
yeah,
Or does it teach you how to write? Because you can't get into the program if you don't already know how to write, if you can't prove that you already have a voice of some
yeah,
value. So
yeah,
it's an interesting conversation.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, and I think I did my MFA when I was older, which I think was good for me because I was able to kind of push against suggestions I didn't like,
Yeah.
and just sort of hold my work myself because I am a very solitary writer. Like people don't usually see my stuff until a few drafts in.
Hmm.
So, yeah, I think that's important that writers develop a sense of their own instincts, their own criteria for what works and doesn't work
Yeah.
in order to, um, be able to make those decisions and not just kind of trust a group.
Right.
It, yeah,
Yeah.
and
Or make
constantly hearing those stories.
Yeah, or make the changes based on feedback and
Yeah,
then lose the story entirely. I have
absolutely.
a bunch of short stories that I feel like I lost
Mm,
in the revision that was based, and this is not, for anybody from my writers group who's watching this. This isn't because
yeah,
of anything, but it's that instinct that you have when you sit down to write a short story,
yeah,
and then the more eyes that get on it, the more that gets lost and
yeah.
impossible to find, in my experience, again.
Right, right.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
before we close off, I would love to talk about what you're writing right now, what you're working on, what your life looks like today and next week and the week after.
Mm. So I have a few things on the go. I My agent currently has a new novel, and I've returned to a novel that I thought had died. Um,
Ooh.
I wrote it years ago. I wrote it actually before my last novel came out. It was the one that I was working on, and then I veered off to write This Has Nothing to Do with You.
Mhm.
And so I've returned to that, and I've ripped out some characters, and I'm changing the voice a little bit, and it seems to be working. So
Oh, interesting.
yeah, and a poetry collection too that I'm trying to finish.
Oh, nice. And do you work on poetry and fiction simultaneously, or do you feel like you have to kinda
I have to focus on one thing at a time.
Yeah.
Um, so I keep putting off the poetry collection. It's kind of super intense, and I know it's going to be hard to hold it.
Yeah.
So I think I'm going to have fun with the novel for a bit, and then schedule in the poetry thing. I just want to get it done. It's like it's been
Yeah.
ongoing for a while, and yeah.
Yeah. I feel the excitement of a novel being reborn. Like, just in you
Yeah.
talking about it, I'm excited for you, and being able to live back in that
Yeah, it's super
old writing.
interesting. And it's
Yeah.
very much in water. Yeah. So,
Oh, that's awesome.
yeah. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you sitting down and talking to me. Again, just to remind everybody, they can find out all about your writing at www.laurencarter.ca. You can buy a copy of Places Like These from bookhugpress.ca, or your independent local bookseller. And that's all.
Thank you so much, Allison. This has been
Thank,
wonderful.
thank you so much, and good luck with your writing and good luck with everything.
Thanks. You too.
All right, take care. Bye.
Bye.